Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. You're looking at a glass and steel tower on the Atlantic edge of Hallandale Beach, Florida, private elevators, key card access, cameras on every choke point. Places like this sell a feeling: sealed, contained, safe. On the night in question, that condition failed. 12:30 in the morning. A quiet high-rise on the Florida coast. Then, 5 sharp cracks shatter the night. Within minutes, 911 lines are lit up, and by sunrise, 2 lives are gone forever. From a law enforcement perspective, what happened next follows a familiar sequence. Dispatch flags, multiple calls, and an acoustic alert consistent with gunfire. Units converge on 1830 South Ocean Drive, the Beach Club 2. First responders clear the lobby and secure elevator banks. They ride up with building security. A long hallway, white light. The target unit sits high, an upper floor with ocean exposure. Through the sliding door glass, officers can see a balcony and 2 people down. No movement. Scene control is immediate. The floor is locked. A contact team enters the unit, clears room to room, checks for a live threat, and backs out. Rescue medics follow to assess. Time of pronouncement is noted. A single residence is now a crime scene. The public message is standardized and deliberate. Isolated incident, no active shooter, no threat to the building or the city. That sentence matters. It keeps panic in the lobby from becoming a crowd on the street. The visual markers inside the unit say indoor shooting. Impact points are visible on or near the sliding door frame. Furniture remains largely undisturbed. No signs of a forced struggle across rooms, no ransacked drawers, no obvious prying on the main lock. From the balcony inward, you can trace a short, violent sequence, not a prolonged fight. Officers place temporary evidence tents near shell casings and secure the immediate footprint so the forensic team can do its work without contamination. Entry and exit are logged. Gloves, booties, and a clean path are enforced. The building's infrastructure becomes part of the evidence. Security produces access logs, fob entries for the unit, elevator keycard timestamps, camera angles covering the lobby, banked elevators, and the corridor at the target floor. In towers like this, the question is always the same: who came and who left? If those records show no third-party access around the time of the gunfire, the case narrows quickly. If they show a gap, then the case widens. On night 1, both possibilities stay open while detectives pull the data. Neighbors on adjacent floors report a cluster of shots in rapid succession. Some count 5, others say more. That discrepancy is common. In closed spaces, echoes stack. What matters is sequence and spacing. A tight string suggests a single burst, not a staggered exchange. It also shapes how ballistics gets staged, how far casings jumped, how many strikes penetrated glass, how many stopped inside the apartment, and where those projectiles were recovered. Those are tomorrow's answers. Tonight, the priority is to hold the scene intact. 2 next-of-kin notifications are initiated. Identities are withheld from the public pending those notifications. Detectives complete a first pass with neighbors. When they heard the cracks, whether there were raised voices beforehand, whether anyone ran for the stairs, a supervisor confirms there's no active search perimeter outside. K9 is not deployed for a fleeing suspect because there is no evidence of one. That decision will be second-guessed online by people who didn't see the hallway cameras or the keycard logs. It's routine. The work continues. Inside the unit, a still-lit television paints the room blue. On the dining table, personal effects sit undisturbed. The balcony door is closed. Its surface shows damage consistent with rounds and secondary fractures. The positions of the bodies are documented but not described for the public. This isn't about shock value, it's about preserving the chain of facts. Every photograph gets an index number. Every index number gets a placement in a diagram. The diagram will later tell a clean story about angles, distances, and human movement just before the shots. By first light, the outline of the investigation is clear. The locus is a single condominium residence at the Beach Club 2. The victims are a married couple who live there. There is no third scene, no car dump, no alley chase. Whatever happened, happened here. That clarity is important, not because it answers the why, but because it shuts down rumor pathways that point outward when the evidence points inward. You will hear this phrase more than once in legitimate briefings. This appears to be an isolated incident. It's not about minimizing the loss of life. It's about scoping the risk and defining the canvas investigators will paint on. In coastal cities, murders aren't just crimes. They tear at the fabric of a vertical community. People buy privacy in buildings like this. They also buy proximity. When the tape goes up, both products fail at once. The early hours are where most public confusion starts. In breaking reports, a double fatality inside a residence is often labeled double homicide. It's a placeholder status. It means 2 deaths under violent circumstances investigated as criminal until facts sort themselves. Later, with evidence in hand, agencies refine their language. That shift is not 2 different endings. It's one investigation moving from a broad box to a specific box. If you watch long enough, the boxes line up. For now, the facts that are safe to state are narrow and firm. Time window, shortly after 12:30 a.m. Location, 1830 South Ocean Drive, the Beach Club 2, an upper floor unit with a balcony facing the ocean. Initial finding, 2 adults deceased on scene inside the same residence. Preliminary public posture, isolated, contained, no suspect at large. The rest, ballistics, gunshot residue, trajectories, weapon recovery, and the determination of who discharged rounds and in what sequence, belongs to the hours and days ahead. There is one more reality any honest narrator should acknowledge. In a clean, access-controlled environment, the data sometimes aligns too cleanly. Sometimes that's the problem. Investigators know to test what looks obvious and to pressure test what feels neat. Was there anyone else with access? Do the card logs and camera timestamps cross-validate? Do round counts from casings match impacts and recovered projectiles? Do the estimated times of death align with the call volume and the acoustic alert? Those are not rhetorical questions. They're steps, and steps are how you keep a case from drifting into story. As the sun rises over Hallandale Beach, a processional of white vans and unmarked sedans cycles through the service entrance. Technicians sign in, wheel cases to the elevator, and disappear upstairs. The building returns to its quiet marketing version of itself, but the apartment does not. It becomes a grid. Every grid cell will either add weight to a conclusion or subtract it. Viewers often want motive first. Investigators want method first. Method withstands time. We will not speculate in this series. We will follow the record where it leads, chapter by chapter, one forensic angle at a time. Tonight, all you need to hold are 5 non-negotiables. A high-rise, a single apartment, multiple shots, 2 people deceased, no public threat outside those walls. Everything else is evidence waiting for its order. If you lived on that floor and heard the cracks, what would you want detectives to check first? The keycard logs, the camera angles, or the trajectory map? Let me know below. We'll walk those components in sequence next. The Beach Club 2 was built for discretion. Residents buy into not just ocean views, but an architecture of security. Controlled entry points, limited elevator access, cameras that record every approach. In a homicide investigation, that design becomes both an asset and a filter. It can confirm who was there and eliminate who wasn't. By mid-morning on November 27, 2024, detectives had begun working through those systems. Building management provided digital access logs showing every key fob event for the unit in question over the prior 48 hours. The fobs record not only the time of entry, but whether the lock was engaged from inside or out. Cross-referencing those with elevator control data, investigators could see when the car stopped at the target floor, which floor it came from, and whether a resident or guest code was used. The first pattern was straightforward. No recorded entries from unknown fobs in the 6 hours before the shots. That suggested no outsider had entered through standard channels. But systems like these aren't perfect. Card readers can be bypassed and doors can be held open, which is why camera footage became the second layer. Hallway cameras on the 45th floor showed the couple returning to their unit earlier in the evening. No one else approached the door before the gunfire window. Lobby cameras told the same story. No unknown visitor signing in, no delivery driver, no unrecognized guest walking past security. To a prosecutor, that points toward an event that originated and ended inside. To an investigator, it raises a critical reminder. When the pool of possible actors shrinks to the occupants, the need for airtight evidence increases. Meanwhile, the medical examiner's office was conducting autopsies. Time of death estimates aligned with the acoustic alert and 911 calls around 12:30 a.m. Both victims sustained gunshot wounds at close range. Exact wound counts and ballistic trajectories were kept under seal pending lab confirmation. That step ensures any later statements can be tested against the evidence. The human side of the file started to fill in. Pajtim Krasniqi, 34, and Sabrina Krasniqi, 27, had lived in the building for some time. Public records showed no recent police calls to their unit. To neighbors, they were familiar in passing but private. One resident told detectives they occasionally heard raised voices through the walls, but nothing that suggested imminent violence. That observation went into the log, not as proof, but as context. From an investigative standpoint, this chapter of the work was about defining the perimeter of the event. A locked high-floor unit, no unauthorized entries on record, no third-party presence on camera, deaths occurring within a narrow window. All of those factors tighten the focus, but they also demand precision. Digital systems can simplify a timeline, but they can also create blind spots if relied on alone. As one veteran investigator noted in the room that day, the data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. When you watch these cases unfold, consider this. In a secure building, where the records say no one came or went, what additional forensic steps would you prioritize to confirm who was in control of the scene? The elevator doors opened to a hallway already sealed by uniformed officers. Yellow tape spanned each end, and a log sheet was clipped to a stand at the center. Anyone entering the unit would have to sign in, list their purpose, and be accounted for on exit. This wasn't just protocol. It was the first link in the chain of custody that would decide what evidence could stand up in court. The lead crime scene investigator stepped through the doorway. Each room was documented as found before any movement of objects. Lighting was photographed in its existing state. Blinds were left as they were. The apartment showed no forced entry. The main door's frame and lock were intact, deadbolt engaged from the inside. That detail immediately mattered. If it held true, it further reduced the possibility of an intruder. Inside the living area, shell casings were marked with numbered evidence tents. The distribution suggested they had been fired from a consistent position rather than from multiple points. Spent rounds were visible in the hardwood floor near the balcony doors. The trajectory team would later map these using rods and lasers to establish the path of each bullet. The balcony itself was treated as part of the primary scene. Its glass door had visible damage, spiderweb fractures around impact points. The shards on the floor inside were consistent with glass breaking inward, which fit with shots fired from within the unit toward the door area. No drag marks or signs of bodies being moved were observed. Positions were preserved for the medical examiner's inspection. Personal effects lay undisturbed on the dining table. A wallet, keys, a phone. These were swabbed for fingerprints and DNA. The phone was bagged for digital forensics, as text or call records in the hours before the incident could establish state of mind or interactions that mattered. Detectives also requested the building's internal maintenance logs. Sometimes repairs or service calls leave a legitimate reason for someone else to be on the floor. Confirming none had been scheduled closed off that potential gap. Initial checks came back clean. No staff logged as entering this unit in the 24 hours prior. By the time the medical examiner's team arrived, the physical boundaries of the scene were set. Their work would determine wound paths, confirm proximity based on stippling or soot, and recover projectiles from the bodies for ballistics comparison. Those comparisons would either match a single firearm or indicate more than one weapon had been used, an answer that could change the shape of the case entirely. At this stage, the evidence leaned toward an event contained fully within the unit, but no public statement reflected that yet. In an investigation, you do not build your conclusion in front of the audience. You build your file in the lab. If you were leading the scene processing here, with a locked door apartment and 2 victims, would you prioritize mapping bullet trajectories first or pulling the digital data from the recovered phone? The 4th day of the investigation marked a shift from containment to deep forensic interpretation. By now, the scene inside the upper floor condo at the Beach Club 2 was stable, sealed, and under tight evidence control. What began as an urgent response in the early hours of November 27, 2024, had evolved into methodical, hour-by-hour reconstruction work. This was the point where a shooting scene either told a coherent story or fell apart under scrutiny. The firearms unit arrived with specialized kits, trajectory rods, laser measurement devices, digital calipers, and impact templates. Their first task was to document every projectile path with precision. Each bullet strike was photographed in situ, then marked with a rod to visualize its angle of travel. Laser beams projected along these rods revealed a clear pattern. All lines converged backward into a single firing position inside the living space, several feet from the balcony doors. This wasn't a chaotic scatter. The grouping was tight, suggesting deliberate aim. The balcony glass bore multiple impact points, each with spiderweb fractures radiating outward. The breakage pattern was consistent with rounds striking from inside to out. That directionality mattered. In an open investigation, establishing whether shots were fired into a residence or out of it can change the theory entirely. Here, the evidence pointed in one direction only. Gunfire originated from within. Inside, the hardwood floor carried shallow gouges where spent rounds had skidded before coming to rest. Technicians measured each mark, noting the entry angle and any deformation of the slug. Rounds that penetrated walls or lodged in the balcony frame were carefully extracted. Each was placed in a separate, labeled container. No mingling, no risk of cross-contamination. The containers were sealed with evidence tape, signed by the recovery tech, and logged for transport to the county firearms lab. Ballistic examination is more than just counting bullets. The lab's comparison microscopes would later match these projectiles to the microscopic striations left by the barrel of a specific firearm. Every gun leaves a unique set of marks, like a fingerprint, on the bullets it fires. If all recovered rounds bore identical signatures, the conclusion would be straightforward. One weapon, one shooter position. If not, the case would take a different turn. ShotSpotter acoustic data had already established a compressed firing window, less than 10 seconds from first to last shot. Cross-referencing that with the tight projectile grouping reinforced the view of a rapid sequence. This wasn't a drawn-out exchange, it was an intense burst of fire. Parallel to the ballistic mapping, the crime lab performed gunshot residue, GSR, testing. Swabs were taken from both victims' hands, the cuffs of their clothing, and nearby surfaces. Positive GSR on a person's hands can indicate they fired a weapon, handled it after discharge, or were in close proximity to its firing. The results would help define not just who was present, but who was in control of the weapon when it was fired. The medical examiner's preliminary autopsy findings added another layer. Both victims had sustained multiple gunshot wounds at close range. The presence of stippling, tiny abrasions from unburned powder, confirmed proximity. Trajectory analysis from the wounds matched the physical bullet paths mapped in the condo. This kind of correlation strengthens a case because it aligns body evidence with scene evidence. One lesser-known but critical check was for bullet wipe, the ring of residue left when a bullet passes through intermediate surfaces before hitting a target. None of the recovered rounds showed wipe inconsistent with the mapped scene, which supported the theory that no intervening objects had deflected the shots. By late afternoon, the ballistic team's diagrams were pinned on the caseboard in the incident room. Lines on paper now mirrored the physical reality inside that condo. A fixed firing position, multiple impacts to the balcony area, no sign of incoming fire. The data was clean, almost too clean. And as one investigator quietly noted, the data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. In other words, while the evidence supported a single sequence of events, it left little room for ambiguity. That could be strength in court, but it also meant fewer alternative scenarios to test. While the public still waited for answers, the investigative team had in hand a coherent ballistic narrative. It wouldn't be released yet, not until every piece from GSR to firearm match had been confirmed in lab reports. Premature conclusions risked undermining the case if even one detail shifted. Cases like this are decided in the margins. Was every projectile accounted for? Did casing counts match projectile counts? Were any rounds unaccounted for in the recovery log? In a secure environment like the Beach Club 2, missing evidence is harder to explain and harder still to forgive in court. When you review the physical evidence from a scene with only two possible actors and no sign of forced entry, what would you put the most weight on? The ballistic match to a single weapon or the residue analysis that might indicate who held it? By the fifth day of the investigation, the case file on the Krasniqi murder-suicide had moved from initial uncertainty to a meticulous, evidence-based reconstruction. Detectives had completed their primary scene work, but the arrival of the full autopsy reports and the processed digital forensics gave the inquiry a sharper edge. The medical examiner's findings provided the biological and ballistic timeline, while the cyber unit's data traced the movements and decisions leading up to the shooting. The autopsy on Pajtim Krasniqi documented 5 entry wounds to the upper chest, each consistent with 9mm caliber ammunition. 3 wounds displayed dense stippling, placing the muzzle within 2 to 3 feet for those shots. The remaining 2 lacked stippling, suggesting either a slight increase in distance or partial obstruction. No defensive injuries appeared on his forearms or hands, an absence that supported the theory he had little or no time to react before the rounds struck. Internally, the damage to his heart and major vessels was catastrophic, causing near-instant collapse. The bullets, recovered intact, were sealed and logged for ballistic comparison. Sabrina Krasniqi's examination confirmed a single contact-range gunshot wound to the right temple. The barrel pressed directly against the skin at the time of discharge. Soot deposition inside the wound track and a stellate tear in the scalp were classic indicators of this range. The trajectory was right to left, aligning with her right-hand dominance. Gunshot residue tests taken at the scene and again post-mortem were heavily positive on her right hand, with markedly lower levels on the left, a pattern consistent with her having fired the weapon. Toxicology revealed no alcohol or narcotics, eliminating impairment as a contributing factor in her decision-making. The 9mm semi-automatic pistol recovered beside Sabrina was registered in her name. Ballistic testing matched all projectiles removed from both victims and the scene to this single firearm. Trajectory reconstruction aligned the 5 chest shots with a shooter standing at close range in the main living area facing Pajtim. The fatal shot to Sabrina corresponded with the position where her body was found near the balcony doors. The absence of signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no displaced objects beyond those impacted by bullet strikes, reinforced the assessment that the event unfolded in seconds rather than minutes. Digital forensics added another layer. Data pulled from Sabrina's phone showed no outgoing calls or messages in the 2 hours preceding the shooting, but location services placed her inside the condo during that period. Pajtim's phone data indicated he entered the unit approximately 12 minutes before the estimated time of death, corroborated by building access logs and elevator camera footage. There were no recorded visitors, and security video confirmed no one else entered or exited the apartment between Pajtim's arrival and the time neighbors reported the sound of gunfire. Taken together, the autopsy results and digital timelines presented a coherent sequence. Sabrina was already inside the condo, the firearm in her possession. Pajtim arrived and, within a short window, was shot 5 times at close range. Sabrina then turned the weapon on herself in a single deliberate action. While the motive remained officially undetermined, the physical and electronic evidence allowed investigators to close the gap between speculation and a precise reconstruction of events. The scene told the story without embellishment. 2 people, 1 weapon, and no outside influence in those final moments. By the morning of November 28, 2024, less than 24 hours after the double fatality at the high-rise in Hallandale Beach, the crime scene had been processed in detail by the Broward County Sheriff's Office Crime Scene Unit. The task was clear: determine the sequence of events that led to the deaths of Pajtim Krasniqi, 34, and his wife, 27-year-old former model Sabrina Krasniqi, without leaving any gaps or contradictions in the record. The condominium's 19th floor unit showed no sign of forced entry. The deadbolt and latch were intact. A keycard assigned to the couple had been used to enter at 6:42 p.m. on the evening of the incident, according to the building's security logs. That was consistent with footage showing both Sabrina and Pajtim returning from the lobby elevator together, each carrying personal items but speaking little to each other. Inside the unit, investigators documented the position of Pajtim's body, collapsed backward on the living room's sectional sofa. He had sustained 5 gunshot wounds to the chest, each from close range. Autopsy findings later confirmed stippling patterns on the skin, indicating shots fired from a distance of less than 3 feet. The murder weapon, a 9mm semi-automatic pistol registered to Sabrina, was recovered on the balcony floor. Ballistics testing matched the casings and recovered bullets to that firearm. Blood pattern analysis showed a high-velocity spatter on the wall directly behind the sofa, consistent with the trajectory from the living area toward the balcony doorway. There was no evidence of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no defensive wounds on either victim. Pajtim's phone, found on the coffee table, had no outgoing messages or calls after 6:45 p.m. Digital forensic review of Sabrina's phone revealed no recent threats or explicit statements of intent, but search history in the days prior included firearm maintenance, Florida homicide statutes, and news articles on high-profile murder-suicide cases. While such searches alone do not prove intent, investigators log them as circumstantial indicators of premeditation. The balcony itself told the remainder of the story. After discharging the final round, Sabrina appears to have stepped outside, placed the pistol near the railing, and turned it on herself. Neighbors in adjacent units reported hearing a series of rapid shots, a pause, and then a single shot that echoed differently, later confirmed as the fatal self-inflicted wound. Toxicology results on both victims were pending at this stage, but initial field observations found no alcohol containers or drug paraphernalia in plain view. Interviews with family members reinforced earlier characterizations of Sabrina's volatility under stress, though none had anticipated an escalation to lethal violence. From an investigative standpoint, the chain of evidence was clear. Entry logs, ballistic matches, blood pattern analysis, and witness statements formed a consistent timeline. No alternative suspects or evidence of outside involvement emerged. The case was provisionally classified as a domestic homicide followed by suicide, with final closure dependent on lab results. While the motive remained elusive, the physical evidence left no ambiguity about the sequence of events. This was one crime scene, one incident, one set of facts, tracked from first contact at the lobby to the final round fired on the balcony. By the 7th day of the investigation, Hallandale Beach Police and the Broward County Sheriff's Office had compiled a complete evidentiary timeline. The goal was not only to confirm the murder-suicide classification, but also to ensure that every physical, digital, and testimonial element supported a single, coherent sequence of events. The timeline began with the couple's return to the condominium at 6:42 p.m. on November 27, 2024. Security cameras captured both entering the lobby together, neither showing overt distress or aggression. Their body language was neutral but notably distant. Minimal eye contact, no verbal exchange. This image was the last public sighting of them alive. Digital evidence placed their keycard at the unit door seconds later. No one else entered or exited until responding officers forced entry. This confirmed there were no outside parties involved after their arrival. The living room held Pajtim Krasniqi's body, positioned on the sectional sofa with all 5 entry wounds to the chest, visible through his shirt. Crime scene reconstruction established the shots were fired in rapid succession from a distance of less than 3 feet. The recovered shell casings and projectiles all matched the 9mm semi-automatic pistol registered to Sabrina Krasniqi. Gunshot residue, GSR, swabs taken from Sabrina's hands returned positive for primer residue on both palms and the webbing between thumb and forefinger, consistent with recent discharge of the weapon. No GSR was detected on Pajtim, reinforcing that he was not the shooter. From there, blood pattern analysis traced the movement toward the balcony. Low-velocity spatter on the sliding door glass indicated Sabrina had crossed into the outdoor space after the shooting. The pistol was found on the balcony floor, near a pool of blood consistent with her own fatal wound. Entry and exit trajectory confirmed she had placed the barrel under her chin before firing a single upward shot. Autopsy reports delivered clear findings. Pajtim's cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds to the chest. Toxicology revealed no alcohol or controlled substances in his system. Sabrina's cause of death was a single contact gunshot wound to the head. Her toxicology showed trace levels of prescribed anti-anxiety medication within therapeutic range. Interviews with neighbors and building staff yielded no evidence of domestic disturbances that evening. However, relatives provided relevant history, documenting prior incidents of verbal aggression from Sabrina under stress, though no recorded physical assaults. Cell phone analysis added another layer. While no threatening texts were exchanged that day, her search history in the preceding week included queries about firearm lethality and recent Florida homicide cases. Investigators considered this circumstantial but notable. The integration of these findings, security access logs, ballistics, GSR results, autopsy reports, and digital traces produced a seamless narrative. Sabrina Krasniqi returned home with her husband, retrieved her registered firearm, shot him 5 times at close range, and moments later took her own life on the balcony. There were no contradictory elements, no second suspect, no alternative scene. Every major evidence point aligned toward one closed sequence of events. The remaining open question was motive. and without a manifesto, suicide note, or direct digital confession, investigators could only classify it as undetermined. By the second week after the Hallandale Beach incident, the investigative phase shifted from active scene work to consolidation. Detectives from the Hallandale Beach Police Department's Major Crimes Unit were tasked with ensuring that every lead had been verified, every witness statement cataloged, and every piece of physical evidence processed under chain of custody protocols. The crime scene itself had already been cleared, but the apartment's interior was documented in full before release to the building's management. Detailed photographs, laser scans, and scaled diagrams preserved the spatial relationships of the bodies, furniture, and ballistic evidence. The balcony, where Sabrina's body was found, was treated as a secondary scene, with trajectory rods confirming the upward angle of her self-inflicted gunshot. Ballistics reports returned without deviation from initial findings. The 9mm handgun recovered on the balcony was conclusively matched to all 6 spent casings, 5 corresponding to rounds fired into Pajtim Krasniqi's chest, and 1 to Sabrina's head wound. Microscopic striation analysis confirmed the weapon had not been used in any other recorded crimes. Digital forensics wrapped up with the extraction of both cell phones and the condominium's networked security system. Investigators found no evidence of third-party communications suggesting outside involvement. Sabrina's device contained recent web searches about self-harm and lethal firearm use, as well as bank account logins showing no unusual activity. Pajtim's phone showed unread messages from relatives earlier that day, none of which were opened before his death. Interviews with friends, family, and professional contacts added contextual weight but not motive. Statements painted a picture of a volatile relationship marked by intermittent arguments, yet with no documented domestic violence calls or restraining orders. Several acquaintances recalled instances of Sabrina expressing frustration in private, but none foresaw a lethal outcome. The Broward County Medical Examiner's final report corroborated the sequence established in earlier chapters. Pajtim Krasniqi, cause of death, multiple gunshot wounds to the chest, manner, homicide. Sabrina Krasniqi, cause of death, contact gunshot wound to the head, manner, suicide. No defensive wounds were found on either party, supporting the theory that the shooting occurred rapidly, without physical struggle. Once the full investigative package was compiled, the state attorney's office reviewed the case. With the perpetrator deceased, there was no prosecutorial path forward. The official classification remained murder-suicide, with the motive officially listed as undetermined. From a procedural standpoint, the case was considered solved. From a human perspective, unresolved questions remained, particularly for the families who had to accept conclusions without the why. This gap between evidentiary certainty and emotional closure is common in domestic homicide cases, where the absence of a surviving suspect or note leaves the narrative incomplete. By early December 2024, the Hallandale Beach case file reached its final stage. Every laboratory report, interview transcript, and photographic record had been logged. The Broward County Major Crimes Unit issued its closing memorandum, detailing the sequence of events established through physical evidence and corroborated witness timelines. The report confirmed that on the morning of November 27, 2024, Pajtim Krasniqi was inside the couple's high-rise condominium when Sabrina Krasniqi discharged 5 rounds into his chest at close range. The weapon, a legally owned 9mm pistol registered to Sabrina, was recovered with all spent casings matching it through ballistic analysis. From there, the sequence moved rapidly. She stepped onto the balcony, where the final, self-inflicted shot ended her life. Toxicology findings indicated no alcohol or illicit substances in either victim's system at the time of death. This removed the possibility of impairment and supported the conclusion that the act was deliberate rather than influenced by intoxication. Digital forensics and subpoenaed records yielded no threats from third parties, no evidence of forced entry, and no indications of outside involvement. While friends described Sabrina's temperament as quick to anger, there was no formal history of domestic violence reports, restraining orders, or criminal complaints between the pair. The absence of a written statement or recorded farewell left investigators without a definitive motive. For the families, this lack of explanation was the hardest truth. Pajtim's relatives traveled from out of state to identify his body and collect personal effects. Sabrina's family, equally stunned, faced the dual shock of loss and the knowledge of her role in the crime. Both households were offered victim services, counseling referrals, and assistance with the administrative process of closing estates. From a law enforcement perspective, the case was resolved. The perpetrator and victim identified, the cause and manner of death determined, the physical evidence consistent with a single narrative. Yet, beyond the paperwork, the human dimension remained unresolved. Domestic homicide-suicide cases like this one rarely leave space for reconciliation or understanding. They close the legal chapter but open years of unanswered questions for those left behind. These are the cases that underscore why investigators emphasize early intervention in volatile relationships. While no single argument or moment of tension guarantees violence, patterns of emotional instability, untreated mental health issues, and poor conflict resolution skills can escalate rapidly. The absence of police calls or visible warning signs does not mean there is no risk. It only means the danger has not yet been documented. In the end, the file was archived under homicide-suicide, motive undetermined. The high-rise unit, once a home, returned to the real estate market within months, stripped of the lives that played out there. The closing note in the final report was simple. Case closed for investigative purposes. No further law enforcement action required. But for the families, closure was something the case could not deliver. Looking back, this case is a sobering reminder that silence in troubled relationships can be as dangerous as open conflict. In life, we often think it won't happen to us until it does. If you see warning signs in someone you love, speak up, reach out, and seek help early. We can't always change the past, but we can learn from it to protect our future. What do you think could have been done differently here? If this story touched you, share your thoughts below and let me know where you're watching from. If you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next story.